Well, hello again everybody. Well, after all the shenanigans with our master radio over the last few weeks, I decided that I wanted to do something really completely different. So I've come into the garage to do a little bit of tinkering. Well, I don't know about you, but I think for an Englishman there's very few things which are finer than a good session tinkering in his shed, or the garage for that matter. So that's what I plan on doing today. Now, some of you may recognise these lanterns from a previous video that I made. Now, it's funny how time flies, isn't it? Because I think I made that video about 2 or 3 years ago where I restored one of these lanterns. I'm not actually sure which one it was, but I'll try and leave a link to it in the show notes. But basically, I say restore it. All I actually did is I rubbed off some of the worst of the rust off it and put a new wick in it, filled it with paraffin, and off we went. All that was very good. And I've been using both of these lanterns, sitting out in the garden looking at the stars, drinking red wine. I've been using these for the last 2 or 3 years. But at the end of last year I actually put them away. But this time when I actually got them out in the spring and filled them with paraffin, I had a little bit of a shock, because all the paraffin ended up running out of them onto my feet. In fact, I think that was this lantern, so I went and actually got another lantern out to use, which was this one. I filled this one up with paraffin, and actually the same thing happened. All the paraffin ran out, and well, what's going on? So I'm just going to tip some fresh paraffin into here. Don't want to put too much in because it's going to end up getting wasted. So here's some fresh paraffin, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to I'm just going to tip some water into it. So here's some water. So you can see there that we've actually got our mix of water and paraffin. So actually the water is separated to the bottom and the paraffin is floating on top of the water. So I've actually tried to mix it up a bit. So of course we all know from that old adage that oil and water do not mix, and we've got some confirmation of that there. So the water sinks to the bottom and the paraffin oil actually floats on top of it. Now, before I put these lamps away for the winter, what I tend to do is I fill them up with paraffin oil, and my thinking behind that is if you just leave like a big void space in them, there's just room in there for you get condensation and they kind of rust from the inside out. So I thought I was doing the right thing by filling them up with paraffin. But I think, unbeknownst to me, what had happened over the summer months where I'd been keeping these outside, well, we get a lot of rain here in Yorkshire, and where I live is very windy. So I think probably a quantity of rain had entered the chimney at the top here, and it had probably run down. And it had run into this fuel container, which is at the bottom. Now, of course, as we just saw with our little jar here, when I looked inside them, because I do inspect them, I look inside, I could see the yellow paraffin floating on top. But what I couldn't see is there was obviously some water building up underneath here, as it has done in this glass. So what I think happened is I put these away for the winter, and I think there was a puddle of water that was probably sitting underneath the paraffin. And I'm fairly sure that, if you look at the corrosion on these things, if I look through the spout there, they're kind of more corroded on the inside than they are on the outside. So I think what has happened is these have actually corroded from the inside out. So we've got a hole there and we've got a hole there. And the bottom of this other lamp is actually really very much worse. It's kind of just puckered with hundreds of holes. So I think what the two of us can do together, we can spend a bit of time, we'll clean this one up. Hopefully this has just got a couple of holes in it which we can maybe solder up. And well, this one is going to take a lot more work. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. We'll take a look when we've cleared some of the rust off. Well, I think on balance the power file might be a little bit too aggressive. Well, we've gone ahead and we've given our lamps a good clean, and well, it reminds me a lot of a couple of Barnsley girls that I once went out with, because from a distance they both look fine, don't they? But I'm afraid when you turn them over and take a close look at the bottoms, well, I'm afraid that does tell somewhat of a different story. So let's have a closer look. Well, in fairness, this first one doesn't look too bad. I can just kind of see 4 areas that need doing. So we've got a bad bit there, got a little pinprick there, another one there, and one there. Now I originally hoped that I could just put some blobs of solder on here, but I think it's going to take more than that. So what I think we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll make a patch that's about as big as this outer ring here, and we'll let it into the centre. I'm going to solder that in. But unfortunately, the larger of our two lamps, the bottom section is actually much worse. The tin worms have really had a good go at it, haven't they? So it's got a couple of holes in the middle and here and there and around this edge here. But unfortunately, those holes really do extend all the way pretty much to the edge of the base of the lamp. So I think the only thing that I can do really with something as bad as this is actually replace the whole of the bottom of the lamp. So I think what we'll have to do is cut out a steel plate which is round, just slightly smaller than this, and then what we'll try and do is we'll have a go at soldering it in. So what are our chances of getting this out the bottom of here? Well, as it happens, better than average. Well, we can really see what's going on now, can't we? So that really is terribly rusty, and there's quite a bit of rust and stuff inside there. So it's clear what's happened. As I said, I think water's got into this over the course of the summer, and then when I put it into storage for the winter, this water was sat at the bottom of this base, and I suspect that all this damage that we can see here, this has been done really quite quickly, you know, maybe just over the winter when I had these lamps in storage. And I actually do feel quite angry with myself because well, it was a mistake for sure, wasn't it? But this just goes to show that, you know, you neglect a tool and this is the result. Well, as you can see, we've gone ahead and I've completely removed the bottom of this lamp, and I've cleaned it out and I've smoothed the edges off a little bit, and I've also gone around it with a wire brush to clean it up as much as I possibly can, because I am going to solder the new base into here, and when it comes to soldering, everything has to be clean, doesn't it? So I've done my best to clean it. Just found an old piece of scrap steel which is a little bit rusty, but it's the best I've got, so we'll have to use it. So I'm just going to measure how big a piece we need. What's that? That's 128, so half of that is 64. So I'm going to cut out a disc of steel with radius 64. Okay, I think that's not far off. Well, I think I'm about 0.1 of a millimetre over there, so that's probably good enough. Okay, just going to put a few witness marks on here in case the blue line rubs off. Now before I cut this one out, I think I'd probably just better measure out my other piece that we're going to need, because I need to make room for it on this sheet of steel, because it's the only piece of metal I've got. So that piece of metal wants to be about 56, I think. 56 in diameter. That should be something like it. I'm fairly sure that will fit with the minimum of adjustment. Okay, let's see if that will go in now. Well, place your bets. Is it going to fit? I think it will. Here's our witness mark. Let's see if that goes in. Yep, perfect. So That's okay. So I've actually got that a perfect fit. Unfortunately, we've got some shenanigans at play. So I had planned to solder in that disc on top of this lip here, and that would seal all the way along there with some solder. Unfortunately, that isn't going to work, and the reason being is I've just found some more holes. Well, certainly I've found one there, which is below that line, and I think there's another one there, and I think the reality is where it's rusty along here, there's actually quite a few holes. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to take this lip out completely now, and I think we're going to have to try and cut that disc down and sit it on here. We're going to lose a little bit of the oil capacity in here, but we're going to have to try and solder it to here. I don't know how we'll get on with that, but yeah, that's what we're going to have to do. Okay, so we've gone ahead and we've removed that lip completely now. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to sit our piece of steel. We're going to have to trim it down, and we're going to have to sit it lower down in here. So we will lose a little bit of our reservoir capacity, but I don't really think that matters very much. Yeah, I don't think it matters. Anyway, it's the best I can do. Now, the original base had some kind of dimples in it. It was pressed to give it a bit more strength, but because this piece of steel is so much thicker than the original, I don't think that will actually be an issue. No doubt that a lot of you are thinking, why am I wasting my time with this rubbish old lamp? And well, I did explain at the beginning of this video is that I was actually tinkering today, and the whole point of tinkering is it has to be pointless. If you're actually doing something because you need to do it, that actually becomes work, where, you know, I don't like doing work, but tinkering, I can tinker for days, weeks, hours, years, but work, no. Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but some men seem to have really big ones, and some men seem to have quite small ones, and on the whole I've always really considered myself to be, you know, quite average. But just the other night I couldn't help noticing that it didn't seem to work as well as it did years ago. Taking a closer look, I couldn't help noticing that my shaft was really grubby, and I was concerned that the end might fall off halfway through. Now, of course, up until now I have always managed to convince myself that it's not size that matters, but it's what you do with it. But I thought that's one question that we could actually answer today. Does size matter? Okay, let me flop it out on the bench and we can take a closer look. So this is my old Weller soldering iron. Now, back in the day, pretty much everybody used to use one of these, and I've got to admit they are a very good soldering iron. They're also temperature controlled. They have quite an interesting way of regulating the temperature, and there's actually a reed switch in here to switch on the power on and off to the heating element, but the tip here is magnetic, and what happens is when you switch the iron on and it's cold, the tip is very magnetic and it pulls in a little reed switch which makes the heating element come on and heat up. But as the tip gets hotter and hotter, the magnetism starts to fade away, and it actually reaches a temperature where the tip is no longer magnetic, and when that happens the reed switch releases and the heating element turns off again. So of course many people would have used these. I had one of these for years, and they were, you know, they were a very good soldering iron. But this soldering iron is only 45 watts, which is not exactly massive. So the main purpose of today's video is actually to take a look at this new Weller soldering iron that I've bought, and this thing really is quite a beast. That other soldering iron we were looking at, it was only 45 watts, but this one is actually 175. Now the reason that I bought this is, I said earlier, I planned to do a little bit of tin smithing today, and I knew that my electronic soldering iron wouldn't be capable of doing it. Now, of course, you know that I also like to tinker with valve radios now and again, and sometimes, you know, valve radio chassis are made out of quite heavy pieces of metal, and occasionally you need to solder something onto those chassis, and again, the small electronics soldering iron, it's just not up to the job. It hasn't got the power and it hasn't got the thermal mass. So we're going to do a little bit of an unboxing and just give this thing a test. So let's open the box up. I haven't opened this before, I'm looking at it for the first time. Let's slide out. Oh! Yes, okay. Yes, this does look like quite a beast, doesn't it? Let's just get rid of some of the packaging, see what we've got. We don't want that. So let's do a little bit of a size comparison. Here's my new soldering iron. I actually didn't think it was going to be quite as big as this in real life. This thing is huge. So here's the electronic soldering iron here, and here's the new Weller 175 watts, and as you can see there's quite a lot of difference on here. I mean, let's just take a look at the tip on this. So the tip on this 175 watt iron, it is absolutely huge, isn't it? It's the whole thing weighs an absolute ton. I'm not sure how heavy it is, but it really is quite a heavyweight thing. In fact, let's just measure the tip, shall we? Okay, so rather than being a 3mm chisel tip, we've actually got a 16mm chisel tip. So yeah, quite a lot of difference there, isn't there? And just feeling the weight of it in my hand, it really is quite a heavyweight thing. Yeah, you probably wouldn't want to keep hold of it for too long. It weighs an absolute ton, and the well, I don't know if you can talk about the balance, but of course the balance is quite awful. It's very front heavy, of course, because there's so much metal here. You know, a great massive heating element, and this will be a piece of plated copper, and yeah, a great big, effectively a great big slab of copper at the end. So this thing is very heavy. So it looks as though it comes with some kind of stand, which I think you have to bend, so let's just do that. So I'm guessing this must go on here, something like that. Of course, we have the instructions here, which we're not going to read because men don't read instructions, so they can go. Now it does come with a proper British moulded plug. It's actually a good quality rubber cable. It's got the HO5 rating on it, which is a cable designed for trailing applications. So the cable on my old Weller soldering iron here, it's got this white cable on it. Now that's definitely silicone, and I've got to admit this one does feel more like rubber, so I don't know if it's a heat-proof cable or not. Maybe we'll find out shortly. So I think the first little test we're going to do is let's see how long it takes to get up to working temperature, and let's see what the wattage is. Now in theory, if it's a 175 watt soldering iron, it should actually draw 175 watts from this little power meter. So let's give that a try. Let's see what my mains voltage is today. Okay, my mains voltage is low for here. It's 242 today. Quite often my mains voltage is nearer to 250. What we'll do is we'll plug the soldering iron in and we'll see what the wattage is. Before I do that, I think we'll also see how quickly it takes to heat up to its working temperature. Now I suspect it's actually going to take quite a bit of time to heat up this, just because we've got so much thermal mass. But I don't know, let's give that a try as well. So let me find some solder. Now quite often when you start talking about soldering irons, people will tell you if you put a new tip in you've got to tin it. Well, I think a lot of that is maybe not true today, simply because the very original soldering irons back in the 1930s and 40s, the actual soldering iron tip, it was just a piece of bare copper, and what would happen is if you didn't tin the tip, the copper, the bare copper, would oxidise very quickly, and then when you did put the solder on it, because it had oxidised, it wouldn't take. But you can see this tip is shiny out of the box, so these are coated tips and they don't really need tinning. But having said that, it doesn't do any harm if you do want to tin it. So here's a little piece of solder. We're going to stick that on there like that, and let's just see how long it takes to heat up. Okay, we're about 2.5 minutes in now, and our solder still hasn't melted. I'm not actually surprised, because we've got a huge amount of thermal mass in the end of this soldering iron. That is a really big heavy lump of copper we're trying to heat up. Okay, 3 minutes in and we've still got no melty. Oh, I think we're getting some melty action. There we go. So 4.5 minutes in, that's how long it takes to heat up to temperature. So it's not exactly quick, is it? Now this solder still feels quite plasticky. Doesn't exactly feel as though this thing has got up to quite its working temperature. Actually, this would be the ideal temperature now for leading a car. You know, if you've ever done leading on an old MG or something. In fact, we've just gone past the leading temperature now, because it's, yeah, now it's starting to get quite runny. Very fine line solder between it being kind of in the plastic stage and it turning runny like it is now. Because I think the next thing we want to know is we actually want to know how hot this thing is getting, don't we? Or I want to know that. Let's get a thermocouple probe out. Okay, I think we're maxing out there at about 370, something like that. I'll tell you what, we'll give it a few more minutes to heat up and see if it continues to get any hotter. Now, I'm not sure if this iron has got any kind of thermostat in it. I suspect not, because looking at the wattage, it's still drawing about 163 watts. It hasn't reduced, so I don't think there is a thermostat in here. So I think it just relies on the natural heat dissipation and the line voltage to actually regulate the temperature. Okay, give it a few more minutes because it's still going up in temperature, I think. Well, I don't know if you've ever dropped a bit of hot solder onto your lap. Well, I have now and again. These accidents happen, don't they? But got to admit, I wouldn't like to drop a gob of solder this big onto my leg. I can see if you were wearing nylon trousers, you'd be in serious trouble as this eats its way through into your underwear. Well, we still continue to go up. We're at 443 degrees now, so we're still continuing to rise in temperature. So as you can see, I've also gone ahead and I've just bought some general soldering flux, and I don't know whether this will be any good or not, or even if we require it, but this is the reason I bought it is because it's what Amazon recommended. So I don't know if it's good stuff or not. Apparently it's a Lacko brand. I'm not sure whether the solder that we use here, I'm guessing this doesn't have any flux in it at all, this plumber's flux. It must actually rely on what's out of this jar. I've got to admit I'm a little bit concerned about using this flux just in case it actually is very active. The metal is such thin on these lamp bases, I'm wondering if the flux will eat into it and cause damage. But again, it comes back to this is what I've got, so this is what I'm going to use. So while our soldering iron continues to heat up, I just thought I would show you a bit of an older type of soldering iron. So this is actually what they used to use back in the day. Now I don't know if you can see it, at the end of here we just have got an enormous piece of copper, and I think that this is one of the old copper irons that I probably have used for repairing car stuff in the past. So this is just a big slab of copper which is kind of shaped into a chisel tip, and again it's very, very heavy. Now at the end there should have been a wooden handle on here, like the handle on a file, but for some reason that's gone missing at some point. So just looking at then this big copper soldering bit, you can probably see it's bright copper here, and that's because before I did take a file and I just roughened it up. So I think I may have mentioned earlier when they used to talk about having to tin a bit, well you had to file them down, and then before you use them for an extended period you have to put tin on it to protect the exposed copper, otherwise it would oxidize and it wouldn't be very good for soldering. But that's what they used to use back in the day. So a lot of these radios that people assembled at home in the 1930s, they would have used a version of this on the gas stove, because that's how you used to heat these up. You would actually have like a gas ring, and you'd have 2 or 3 of these soldering irons on the go, all in the gas ring. So you'd pick one up, do a little bit of soldering, and then when it actually went cold you'd pick another one up and put this one back on the fire and let it heat up again. And to be honest, if you've ever used some of these, they've got such a huge amount of thermal mass, they actually do work incredibly well. And like I say, this is a really big one for car stuff, but you could have got smaller ones which were more suitable for radio work. This is just what I happen to have here. So I think at the end of the day I've just got to actually have a go with this and see how it goes. So I've actually gone ahead and I've given this a really good clean, and then I actually also cleaned it down with acetone. So I think I have removed as much of the grease off my fingers as we can. Now what I'm not sure whether or not I should actually go around this and tin it first, or actually just go ahead and have a bash at it. I'm not exactly sure. As I say, I don't think I want to go too mad with the flux, but yeah, I'm playing it by ear. I've not done this before. It's either going to work or it's not, and at this stage your guess is kind of as good as mine for exactly what's going to happen. Okay, so we've got a little bit of flux on there now. So I'm kind of thinking what I want to do is probably just tack this at a couple of corners. That looks much more of a mess than I hoped actually at this stage. Now the thing about paraffin, which is the fuel for these lamps, it's incredibly searching. You only need a little tiny, the tiniest of little pinpricks in here, and it will leak like a sieve, unfortunately. So what do you think? I think that looks okay. It does look as though some of the soldering is perhaps a bit low in certain areas, but I think I might have got it. I think there's only one way to find out though, which is actually to put some paraffin in it, isn't it? So well, I guess without any further ado, that's what we're going to do. Let's put some paraffin in it, and it's either going to leak or it's not. Let's find out. So I've just turned you over. I thought you might want to go on top for a change. Is it leaking? Okay, well I'm taking a look with you. I can't see anything, so let's just let it sit for half an hour while we do the other one with some paraffin in it, and if it's got any leaks I'm sure the paraffin will find it. Now, as I said earlier, don't use this as an instruction video. I've got no idea what I'm doing. I'm just having a go, tinkering. I'm doing the best I can. If you think there's better ways of doing this, then, you know, by all means, leave it in your comments. That's what it's for. Leave it in the comment section. Tell me what I should have done better or what I should do next time if I do it again. I don't know if you'll be able to see on camera, but I've got a big hole down here, and basically the gap between the two pieces of metal is just too big. So, you know, a little bit of a lesson to self this. This is like when you TIG welding, it really won't tolerate any gaps. If you've got gaps, the solder will just fall through. But I think gravity isn't helping me, because the solder, when you get it hot, it tries to drain through. Now, if you were really cunning and good with the temperature control, you could probably do it a bit like lead filling, where you can get the solder into its plastic state and then just work it. Maybe that's something to have a try next. And I think we might have just about done that, you know. So this is the smaller of the two lamps, and I'm glad to report that this one doesn't appear to be leaking where we did our repair. This seems perfect, but unfortunately we do seem to have sprung a new leak in this corner somewhere, and yeah, I'm not exactly sure where from. It looks like it's over here somewhere. Let me just put a mark on there. So I think what I'm going to do is going to just clean it off with something. What have we got here? We've got some brake cleaner. Let's give it a clean. I'm going to put some more paraffin in it, and maybe we can see where that's coming from, that little bit of weeping paraffin. I don't know if this will show up on camera, but if you just follow the end of this cable tie here, can you see there's a little wet patch spreading out? Can't actually see where it's coming from, it just seems to be weeping very slightly. I think the easiest thing to do is just try and put a blob of solder on there. Let's try that, maybe that'll fix it. So let's start off by just putting a little tiny bit in, no point in going too mad with it, as it might all end up on my feet. Okay, so this may not be the tidiest soldering job in the world, but we've all got to live and learn, haven't we? It does actually look as though it's actually stopped the leak, so yeah, that's what we intended. Let's put some more paraffin in it and leave it for an hour, because I'm sure if there's a leak it will show up then. Okay, well I've had our two lamps stood on this piece of newspaper here, so if we were getting any leakage or seepage it would have spilled out onto the paper, so let's just move them out of the way and see if we've got any. Nope, so that's a success. We have actually managed to seal these. How long they will stay sealed is a different matter. So I'll go ahead and I'll just give these lamps a bit of a clean, and then I'll bring you back later, because I think you'd probably like to watch me dip in my wick, wouldn't you? No, I don't know what it is. I don't know if these wicks are slightly the wrong size for these lamps. Maybe a difference between metric or imperial, I've got no idea. But for some reason these wicks that I buy, I always struggle to get them in, and I'm not even sure which way up they're meant to go in, whether it's from the top or from the bottom. I have tried both ways, and whichever way you put them in, it's still a fight. Okay, it was a little bit of a struggle, but I did manage to get both these lamp wicks installed. I'm wondering if these aren't quite the right size, but you know, you're a bit limited for what you can buy these days, so I might have to look in to see if we can get some slightly smaller ones, because yeah, these don't fit either of these two German lamps particularly well. Now the main thing I did want to talk about though is this Weller soldering iron. So on balance, what do I think about it? Well, it was totally the wrong tool for the job that I think I was trying to do. This is far too big. I mean, 175 watt iron is a big powerful soldering iron. Now I said at the beginning of the video I was hoping to use this on valve radio chassis and stuff like that. I don't think you would find any use for this iron on stuff like valve radio chassis. It's just far too big, and it runs too hot. I'm trying to think who would use this. I've done a little bit of stained glass work in the past, and typically you would use 100 watt iron for stained glass work. 175 watt would be far too powerful. I'm trying to think of people maybe who are into doing copper work. You know, maybe people that do architectural copper work, like soldering copper gutters and things like that. They might find a use for this soldering iron, but certainly I don't think it's any good for people like me that are interested in valve radios. Now I also don't think it did a very good job of soldering these lamp bases, and that isn't the fault of the soldering iron, that's the fault of me, because it's just far too big. The tip is too big. What I ended up doing in the end was actually just using one side of the tip, whereas it would have actually been far better to have used a smaller iron. And I think you can also get some soldering iron where the tip is bent over at 90 degrees. I think they're more useful in that type of soldering application. I think they call them Cooper soldering irons. I suspect when you're doing soldering, you actually just want to put on quite a fine kind of fillet around here, just a little fillet. Now I was actually using the whole of the iron kind of on the flat, and that's why we've got so much solder on here. We've probably got 10 times the amount of solder that we actually needed. I really should have been able just to run a very fine fillet bead all the way around it using a much smaller bit, but as I say, that isn't the fault of the soldering iron, that's my fault from ordering. Again, if I wanted to do something for actually soldering tin work, I would have got a smaller iron, and I would have got one that had a tip at 90 degrees or 45 degrees to the work, because I kind of ended up trying to almost use the iron in a stabbing motion. As I say, that isn't a fault of the iron, that's just simply me that didn't purchase the correct tool for the job. But you know what it's like, you're not exactly sure. You know, I wasn't sure before I started the job, and what I've learned is that this iron is too big for my needs. But you never know, it might come in useful at some point. Now, there was a test that I wanted to do. I actually wanted to see if the actual metalwork here is earthed. Now, I was looking at some cheap Chinese soldering irons. Now, I'm not going to say that they were no good, but they came complete with like a 2-core mains flex, and well, that would worry me, because you think that potentially there's a lot of current maybe behind some of these things, and you've got a heating element in close proximity to conductive parts, and if that heating element was to break down, the end of this could, you know, could become live. Now that would certainly worry me. Let's just see if this is earthed or not. Okay, so that is a good sign. So if we get a fault with the heating element, and of course you could get a fault with the heating element because this thing gets damn hot. It gets to around 500 degrees, so if the heating element was to break down and come in contact with the metal body, this thing is live, and then you're holding a piece of solder which is also conductive. You could get a really nasty electric shock. Now, as I say, I was looking at some of the cheap soldering irons that you can buy from Banggood, and you can actually buy 200 watt soldering iron from Banggood for I think it was actually about £12, and on the picture it actually looked quite good, but I noticed it just had the 2-core mains flex, you know, like a type that the Americans use, or a continental plug. Well, I would think twice about buying one of them. I would really want to know that my soldering iron was earthed. So the Weller is earthed, that's a good sign. And I think we should also just check that our mains cord on the Weller soldering iron, let's see if it is if it's a heat resistant cord. Now, I said earlier, I know that this number, this H05 number, that does mean it's a tough rubber cable, which is designed for trailing applications, because I use some of these cables myself. But there's a couple of other letters after it, which is the double R and the F. So let's just see if it is heat resistant. I'm just going to use my soldering iron. This other soldering iron is set to 350 degrees. Not sure about that. Was that actually melting? Okay, well, I actually think that it may be actually melting that. Not quite sure. Let me try it a little again. You know, I'm not actually sure. It doesn't actually seem to be melting and running like some rubber cables would do. It certainly isn't doing that, but it has left a mark on it. So certainly it doesn't seem to be as heat resistant as some silicon cables that, you know, would traditionally come on a soldering iron. So yeah, the verdict's out on that. I don't want to wreck the cable on here. So the verdict is out. It's got some heat resistance, but I don't think maybe it's as good as a silicon lead. I'm not exactly sure though. Let's just check the weight of our Weller soldering iron, but for comparison let's just weigh a typical electronics type iron. So as you can see, the handpiece, including the element, weighs about 63 grams. And our Weller soldering iron weighs around 427 grams, so just under half a kilogram. Now, the piece of steel that I ended up putting in our lamp base here, it was just a piece of mild steel. Now, I think back in the day you could actually buy steel plate, steel sheet, and I actually think it was tin plated, and it was for doing things like making fuel tanks on cars. Now that would have been a better thing to use, because of course this just being mild steel, it doesn't have any corrosion resistance. So, you know, give it a few years and we could be back where we started with needing to replace this base. How long it will last, I don't know. I guess time will tell, won't it?